Okay, welcome into a breaking news edition of Patriots Press Pass. Earlier this afternoon, Julian Edelman, who we all could have guessed wasn't really doing great this year and has some obvious ailments, underwent what initial reports are calling, and Evan, see if we can add another adjective to this to make it appear more innocuous. Precautionary standard knee procedure. So somebody, whoever's feeding the information here, really, really, really wants us to know that this is not a big deal and that Edelman will be fine and he's going to miss Sunday's game. Edelman looks anything but fine.
Yeah, Edelman is not fine, and I don't mean to, make it out to be some huge thing or anything like that. But from what I understand, Michael Giardi of NFL Network reported this. Edelman is dealing with bone on bone in his knee at this point. So what you're going to see is that throughout the rest of his football career, regardless of where he is playing, he's going to have sort of a consistent knee issue that's going to pop up on the injury report week in and week out, and is going to be something that they're going to have to manage, and he's going to have to manage pain tolerance wise for probably the rest of his NFL and football career. So that's where we're at with Julian Edelman right now, is that this cleanup procedure they're hoping is going to help him with pain management, but it's not necessarily going to eliminate the problem altogether.
Yeah, and this is kind of, without the news of the procedure, this is kind of the vibe you got watching Edelman in general this year. He
Yeah.
came in, uh, you know, to start the year, and you could tell almost right away he wasn't right. So it's not a new injury. There was nothing acute that happened that set him back. He was managed in, what limited camp action they had, and you could tell almost from the first route and the first catch he had of the year, he was getting up like old men, or like, middle-aged dads get up off the couch, trying to play with their kids, like creaky, pushing it up, like, I gotta do this, So you could tell, like, it took everything he had to do what he's doing early, and he had a productive game or two, but the last few games he has been absolutely invisible. So this obviously was something they felt they had to try. And again, not to draw another sports analogy here, because the injuries, I'm sure, are a good bit different, but you're worried you're in Dustin Pedroia land here with Edelman, of like,
Yeah.
you're gonna it's a downhill trajectory here, and you're just hoping you can squeeze who knows what out of it here. And we're not doctors, so we don't know, but obviously, and we'll try to talk to Doc Flynn later in the week as well, see if she can provide some insight. But this doesn't bode well for certainly the rest of this season for Edelman, and sadly, again, not to jump to too many conclusions, the rest of what has been an incredible career for someone who's always been Mr. Reliable, Mr. Dependable here. And now it's really, a physical ailment that's going to make it really hard for him to be the guy we're so used to seeing.
Yeah, I think what we saw over the last couple of weeks is that the Patriots, obviously they're not. This is not news to them that Edelman's been dealing with this knee issue. It's not news to us. So they've been sort of crafting the offense around the fact that he is not 100%. His snap count has been down dramatically over the last couple of weeks, and even all of this year, he's all the way down to about 60% of the snaps. And kind of the role that I was sort of talking about with him is sort of that Danny Amendola role, where you come in on third downs, passing situations, fourth quarter, gotta have it type of times, but you're not necessarily the type of guy that plays every single down. That's where we're at now with Julian Edelman as well. And on top of that, when you look at sort of the way that they were using him in the passing game, a lot of it was him as a decoy, running him out into the flats, running him underneath the defense just to pull coverage away from other guys, where really the ball was, I know Bill Belichick always says, oh, we don't draw up plays to throw the ball just to one guy. But in reality, the play was going to hit elsewhere, or the first read in the progression was elsewhere, and Edelman was kind of on the backside, or maybe a 2 or a 3 in the progression. And the reason being was because he wasn't 100%, so they were kind of using him more as a decoy in those cases. So I think that that's kind of where we're at with Edelman now, where he's that sort of super sub and super situations, and when he comes in on third down, he comes in situationally, and then you kind of let some of the other guys that they have at receiver, it's a very thin group, but you let some of those other guys play the lion's share of the snaps. And unfortunately, like you said, I think everybody's just a little bit wary of the fact that this could be a downward slope of this
Yeah.
knee is probably never going to be the same ever again.
Yeah.
And this is probably the beginning of the end for Julian Edelman.
And that's the thing. Let's talk about these other guys. Okay. I mean, obviously, we know at this point, N'Keal Harry appears unlikely as well. He'd missed practice again on Thursday. You were out there. So you have no Harry's dealing. He's in the concussion protocol. He's not out of it by tomorrow. He's not playing in the game. Is that correct? That's usually how it works.
Correct. I mean, if you don't practice during the week, you hardly ever play.
Yeah.
So
So
that would be my guess.
that's it. We have 2 down with really no signs of seeing him. You never know with these things, obviously. That's always the disclaimer and the caveat with the concussion thing. It's hard to put timetables on these things, but he's trending towards not playing. So you're as ineffective as the two have been, and the amount of the amount of criticism that's been thrown, particularly Harry's way. I think Edelman gets a pass because everybody knows he's been ailing. They're still the best you've got. So now we're in, I mean, Demir Bird, Jacoby Myers, Gunnar Olszewski land, and then practice squad. I mean, what are we looking at? Zuber or
Zuber? Yeah. I think the biggest thing with this is that the most disappointing part about it is honestly that Julian Edelman at this current state, at this version of himself with the injury, Jacoby Myers was probably just as good as Julian Edelman at this point. So I don't actually look at the Edelman injury from that respect and say, oh, well, the Patriots don't have Julian Edelman anymore. They were screwed before. Now they're really screwed. I actually think they're still equally as screwed as they were before Edelman's injury, just because of how poorly he was moving around the field. And I think a guy like Myers, certainly when he came into that game last week, added a little bit of something. He's sort of that Z slot type of receiver, just
big
like
slot,
Edelman, that can, move around and do some different things and runs precise routes, even though he's not the fastest or the most explosive of route runners. And that's been my concern with Jacoby Myers. He certainly knows how to run routes, and he's a very good technician in that regard. So in reality, there are 2 or 3 wide receiver packages with Myers in the slot or Myers in the Edelman role instead of Julian. I don't know at this stage if it's really making that much of a difference given what they were getting out of Edelman anyways.
It doesn't, but I mean, I know you, I was listening in on the Patriots Beat podcast, which is going to be posting shortly on CLNS Media. You did with that, it's Greg, right? Greg Thompson,
Yeah,
from Cover One out in Buffalo. And he had expressed some concern that the Bills don't match up well in the secondary with a guy like Edelman. And again, he may be in his mind referring to the ghosts of Edelman past and not necessarily the Edelman that we're seeing right now. That being said, whether or not he could have been effective in this matchup, or as you mentioned, a decoy, which is valuable because look, at the end of the day, you want to tie up a defender who has to keep you honest on Edelman. If you know you can cover him with a linebacker, it makes them much tougher to defend. But when you have to expend a resource in order to chase him around the field, regardless of whether or not you're truly concerned he can beat you, that's just one person that's not somewhere else. So the trickle-down effect, I think, is real, even though if the actual performance doesn't matter.